History is full of battles where the outcome seemed predetermined, numbers, terrain, and logic all pointing in one direction. Yet every so often, a moment arrives when human willpower bends mathematics until it snaps. This is the story of such a moment, a clash where destiny itself felt rigged, only to collapse under the weight of one man's impossible genius. What happened in the Albanian highlands in 1457 wasn't simply a victory. It was a rupture, a day when 8,000 men rewrote the fate of empires and forced the world to admit that the unimaginable can sometimes become real. 8,000 men stood facing 80,000. By every principle of medieval warfare, they should have been swept from the mountains within hours. Yet what unfolded in the Albanian peaks on September 2nd, 1457 would send tremors from Constantinople to Rome and overturn centuries of military doctrine. Imagine it, 30,000 Ottoman soldiers dead before sunset. Not after a drawn-out siege, not after a year-long campaign, but in 6 astonishing hours. Hours in which the survival of Christian Europe hung on an ambush so improbable that modern strategists still consider it numerically absurd. By the end of this video, you'll see how the greatest upset of the Middle Ages unfolded almost minute by minute, and why its tactics are still dissected half a millennium later. 3 revelations will leave you stunned. First, the betrayal of a nephew whose treachery should have handed the Ottomans an effortless victory. Second, the vanishing army ruse that lured 80,000 elite troops straight into the jaws of death. And third, the moment when fire transformed a peaceful valley into a blazing trap fit for a nightmare. How did 8,000 men make themselves invisible to an army 10 times larger? Why did Scanderbeg's own blood relative guide the Ottomans against him? What innovation shattered the discipline of seasoned soldiers and sent them into blind panic? How could trained men become so disoriented that they slaughtered their own comrades in the chaos? What forced the Sultan himself to declare the battle's outcome impossible when he read the reports? In just 6 hours, more men died than in many entire medieval campaigns. The Ottomans marched in with a force capable of crushing kingdoms. They withdrew, leaving behind enough corpses to populate a city. The year is 1453. Constantinople, the jewel of Eastern Christendom, has just fallen. The Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II stands at its most fearsome height. Kingdom after kingdom lies broken in its path. Serbia subdued, the Byzantine Empire extinguished. Much of Hungary threatened. Their war machine, with its janissaries, titanic cannons, and endless ranks of infantry and cavalry, appears unstoppable. But in the wild Albanian mountains stands the one man they cannot bend. Gjergj Kastrioti Scanderbeg, the Dragon of Albania. He is not a simple rebel. He was raised inside the Ottoman court itself, shaped by their finest teachers, trained by their greatest commanders. He knows their strengths, their flaws, their habits. He speaks their tongue. He knows their pride. And in 1443, he turned all that knowledge against them. For 14 relentless years, Scanderbeg has baffled, bloodied, and humiliated the empire. His League of Lejja has united the Albanian tribes for the first time. From remote strongholds high in the mountains, he has shattered invasion after invasion. European kings call him the athlete of Christ. Gold and letters of praise flow to him from Catholic monarchs desperate for a hero. But the Ottomans have acquired a weapon more dangerous than any cannon. Hamza Kastrioti, Scanderbeg's own nephew. This is where the tale darkens. Hamza chose the Sultan over his family. He converted, joined the Ottoman court, and now marches at the head of their forces. He knows every mountain path, every water spring, every hiding place his uncle once used. He now leads an enemy army to crush his homeland. Look at the map. Albania is the front gate of Europe. If it falls, the road to Rome lies wide open. Venice trembles. The Pope prays. The stakes could not be higher. This isn't merely the fate of a mountain people. It is the question of whether Christian Europe can halt the Ottoman tide. The Ottomans gather a massive host. roughly 80,000 men by most accounts, though conservative estimates place it at 40,000. Even that smaller number overwhelms Scanderbeg's forces 4-1. They come with superior weapons, overwhelming supplies, and now insider intelligence from a traitor. David versus Goliath doesn't begin to describe it. This is David versus Goliath's entire clan, and David's own cousin is showing them where he hides his sling. Yet hidden in the mountains was something no one expected, a strategy so brilliant it transformed certain defeat into a mathematical miracle. As the Ottoman columns advanced into Albania during the summer of 1457, Scanderbeg performed a move that baffled even his own men. He made his entire army vanish. The composition of the Ottoman force reveals their absolute confidence. 40,000 infantry, battle-tested troops who had crushed cities from Anatolia to the Balkans. 20,000 cavalry, including the elite Sipahi horsemen. Another 20,000 support troops, engineers, and auxiliaries. This was not a raid. This was a force designed to erase Albania from the map. Commanding them were Isaac Bey and Hamza Kastrioti. Isaac Bey, the governor of Uskup, thirsting for retribution after previous defeats, and Hamza, who believed he knew every tactical secret his uncle had ever used. What he didn't realize was that Scanderbeg had developed new ones. Scanderbeg's 8,000 weren't only outnumbered. They lacked armor, supplies, and heavy equipment. But they had something far deadlier: mastery of the terrain. Every man was born in those mountains, raised where the paths were narrow and the air thin. They could navigate slopes that would exhaust foreign troops. They could hide in landscapes that seemed barren. The valley of Tumenishta would be the perfect stage. A long, bottlenecked valley with steep flanks, forested ridges, and only one wide entrance. The Ottomans saw a safe campsite. Scanderbeg saw a grave. But to lure them in, the Albanians first had to vanish. He issued an order that sounded like madness: disappear completely. No resistance, no skirmishes, no signs of life. Ottoman scouts found deserted villages and watchtowers. It looked as if the Albanians had abandoned the entire region. Hamza confidently assured the commanders that this was his uncle's typical tactic: retreat, hide, defend the fortresses. Classic Scanderbeg, he insisted. But this time Scanderbeg had crafted a psychological illusion. False rumors spread through shepherds and traders. The Albanian army was collapsing. Scanderbeg was ill. The clans were arguing. He might even have fled to Venice. Meanwhile, at night, the real army slipped through hidden trails in small groups, moving like shadows through routes invisible to mounted scouts. During the day, they hid in caves or thick forest, leaving no trace, not even a cooking fire. Timing was crucial. Too soon, and the Ottomans would notice. Too late, and the trap would spring empty. Scanderbeg split his force into 3 groups, each assigned to a precise position above the valley. They dug hidden pits, stored weapons, and piled dry brushwood for a purpose the Ottomans would soon learn the hard way. By September 1st, the Ottoman host marched confidently into the valley. It appeared ideal: water, space, and protection. Hamza again confirmed its safety. As darkness fell, 80,000 Ottoman soldiers settled in for the night. Fires flickered across the valley floor. Horses snorted, metal clanked, laughter drifted through the air. They had no idea death was already tightening around them. From the ridges above, 8,000 silent figures watched. Tomorrow, they would either perform the impossible or die attempting it. By nightfall, September 1st had become the last peaceful evening many of those soldiers would ever see. The weakest side of the valley, the Tumenishta entrance, was precisely where the Albanians positioned themselves. Hamza had assured the commanders that those slopes were too steep for any real threat. He couldn't have been more wrong. Under the moon's dim glow, 3 Albanian columns made their final approach. Thousands of men crawling through brush, sliding down ravines, navigating cliffs in total silence. Weapons wrapped in cloth, armor covered, not a single sound allowed. By 3 a.m., they were in place. Then came the hardest part of war: waiting. Dawn broke over September 2nd with a thin veil of mountain mist sliding across the valley floor. The Ottoman camp woke slowly, groggily, centuries rubbing sleep from their eyes after a night spent jumping at imagined threats. Morning prayers murmured through the ranks. Fires sputtered back to life as soldiers prepare their breakfast. The day looked clear, warm, and harmless. Ideal weather, they thought, to resume their march deeper into Albanian territory. They had no idea the next 6 hours would produce a death rate almost unheard of in medieval warfare. But before the slaughter erupted, the killing began quietly. The signal for the full assault would be Scanderbeg's war horn, but not yet. First came the silent removal of the outer guards. Albanian mountaineers, men who had hunted wolves and boar since they were children, crept forward like shadows. A palm clamped over a mouth, a dagger slid across a throat. One by one, the Ottoman sentries on the valley's exposed side simply ceased to exist. No cries, no alarms, just human shapes swallowed by the fog. At precisely 6 a.m., everything changed. Scanderbeg's war horn let out a long, chilling note that boomed across the valley. Every Albanian heart surged with recognition. Ottoman blood ran cold. The sound ricocheted off stone walls, echoing so wildly that no one could tell where it came from. Here's the detail that still bewilders historians. The Ottomans were veterans, men who had endured ambushes before. Yet instead of discipline snapping into place, their composure shattered instantly. Something about this attack bypassed training and dove straight into instinctive fear. Then the arrows fell, not from a single ridge, but from 3 separate heights. The sky darkened as volleys rained down. Men dropped before they could reach shields. Horses reared, shrieking, but this was only the prelude. As Ottoman officers shouted orders and tried forming lines, Albanian war cries burst from multiple directions, wild, ululating screams that bounced around the valley until it sounded like tens of thousands of attackers instead of 8,000. And in that moment, Hamza understood the catastrophic mistake he'd made. He had expected his uncle's familiar tactics, slash, retreat, vanish. But this was different. Scanderbeg wasn't aiming to wound the Ottoman army. He intended to annihilate it. Yet the Ottomans surprised everyone. Despite the shock, elite Janissary units began forming defensive squares, their legendary discipline fighting to stabilize the chaos. Ottoman cavalry captains rallied their riders for countercharges. For a brief, flickering moment, it looked as though Ottoman order might suppress Albanian fury. Then Scanderbeg made his move. He led the main cavalry assault himself, smashing into the Ottoman left flank. A second Albanian's force crashed into the right. Infantry poured down from hidden pits and forest cover, howling like spirits from some ancient nightmare. But still, the real killing had barely begun. Ambush psychology is terrifying. When soldiers cannot locate the attacker, when every shadow threatens death, when familiar ground turns into a trap, panic spreads faster than fire. Ottoman units pressed backward into their own tents, tripping over ropes, falling into cooking fires, colliding with comrades. Watch now how victory twisted into massacre. Every attempt to form battle lines collapsed. The dust, smoke, and confusion made it impossible to identify friend or foe. Orders in Turkish clashed with commands in Arabic. Hamza shouted himself hoarse, trying to restore order, but his voice was drowned beneath the roar of death. The next 4 hours would turn this valley into Europe's most gruesome battlefield. Arrow storms from 3 ridges turned the Ottoman camp into a killing pit. Albanian archers, positioned through the night with perfect angles, fired into tightly packed ranks where every shot struck flesh or mount. But Scanderbeg understood Ottoman warfare well. Arrows alone don't break an empire. He weaponized sound. The valley's acoustics multiplied Albanian war cries into something monstrous. To Ottoman ears, it sounded like an army 10 times larger. Scanderbeg had tested these echoes personally. Then came his first devastating cavalry charge. The blow hit the Ottoman left flank where the valley wall narrowed into a natural funnel. Soldiers still struggling to form up were crushed instantly. Albanian spears punched through rushed shields. The air filled with tearing metal, the scream of horses, and the panicked shouts of men realizing they were cornered. Yet once again, the Ottomans rallied, briefly. Isaac Bey, hardened by decades of battle, gathered his personal guard. They formed a solid defensive square, spears outward, an island of order amid the madness. Other Ottoman units fought desperately toward this lifeline. The field turned to sludge beneath thousands of boots as blood and dirt churned together. The peaceful camp from the night before became an abattoir. The Ottomans' overwhelming numbers now turned against them. Too many bodies, too little space, a crowded army collapsing inward on itself. And this is where the statistics turn horrifying. 1,000 dead every 10 minutes. That's the conservative estimate. Hamza's desperate attempts to restore cohesion illustrated the tragedy of his betrayal. He rode through the madness shouting commands in both Albanian and Turkish. Some soldiers tried to obey. Others froze. Many simply fled in terror. Then Scanderbeg released his final weapon. The Albanians hadn't only prepared blades and bows, they had prepared fire. At 3 short blasts of Scanderbeg's horn, torches appeared, pre-hidden among the troops. The Albanians ignited the dry brush on the valley slopes and abandoned Ottoman wagons. The goal wasn't to burn the enemy. It was to blind them. Morning wind, predictable in those mountains, rolled dense smoke down into the valley like a living creature. Visibility collapsed. Men could not see 5 feet ahead. Ottoman archers were useless. Cavalry charges were impossible. Officers vanished in the haze. And then came the horror. Through the smoke, soldiers began killing their own men. Shadows were stabbed on instinct. Movement triggered volleys of arrows meant for Albanians. Cries of "We're Ottoman! We're Ottoman!" filled the fog, but no one knew who to trust. The elite household cavalry of Isaac Bey attempted a desperate breakout. They formed a wedge and charged toward what they believed was the valley entrance. Instead, they galloped directly into Scanderbeg's prepared kill zone. Hidden trenches, wooden stakes, pitfalls. Horses were impaled mid-leap. Riders were thrown like rag dolls. The attempted breakout turned into a massacre within the massacre. In the smoke, hand-to-hand combat became a living nightmare. Men fought shadows. Albanian warriors, using prearranged signals, maintained perfect coordination. Ottoman soldiers, isolated and blind, fought alone. Bodies piled so fast they formed barriers. Men climbed over their dead comrades to flee. Wounded soldiers suffocating under corpses added their screams to the rising madness. The valley floor morphed into a labyrinth of death. 15,000 killed or dying in 3.5 hours. More than many medieval armies had in total. And yet the Albanians didn't slow. Scanderbeg now pushed forward for the blow that would echo through centuries. He led another thunderous cavalry charge straight into the collapsing Ottoman center. Tactically unnecessary, yes, but symbolically essential. This victory needed to be absolute, a warning carved into history. What followed ensured that survivors would never forget his name. The Ottoman army, an institution known across continents for iron discipline and battlefield precision, disintegrated in a matter of moments. Soldiers who had marched with pride the day before now tossed aside helmets and shields as if they were anchors dragging them toward death. Armor that once symbolized imperial strength became a burden they tore off in desperation. The wounded were trampled where they lay, swallowed by a tide of terrified men scrambling for the narrow valley entrance. That single exit, which had appeared so defensible the previous night, now became a bottleneck of agony. Thousands pressed toward it at once. The sheer crush of bodies was so overwhelming that many were suffocated or crushed before they even reached Albanian blades. And waiting at that choke point, positioned with brutal precision, were Scanderbeg's warriors, cutting down fugitives as easily as harvesting crops. Yet the darkest moment came not from the rank and file, but from the fall of Isaac Bey. Whether an Albanian spear brought him down or his own panicked cavalry ran him over. Chroniclers disagree. What is certain is this: the moment his body hit the ground, the last thread of Ottoman cohesion snapped. With their commander gone, the Ottoman hierarchy evaporated. Officers either died trying to rally their men or abandoned their posts entirely. The once formidable army dissolved into frightened individuals, all thinking the same thought: escape. Surrender attempts began almost immediately, but they found no mercy. Albanian fighters, hardened by years of Ottoman raids and fueled by the adrenaline of the ambush, were in no mood to accept pleas for mercy. Ottoman soldiers threw down swords, collapsed to their knees, and begged in broken Albanian or Greek, only to be struck down where they knelt. For a moment, the fury of battle overpowered every instinct except survival and vengeance. But then Scanderbeg did something unexpected. Recognizing the enormity of the collapse and understanding that prisoners could become bargaining chips worth far more than bodies, he ordered his officers to halt the massacre. It took time for the command to ripple through the chaos. Some Albanian warriors, deep in battle fury, had to be physically restrained. But gradually, the killing gave way to capture. Ottoman soldiers, seeing others taken alive, began surrendering in waves. Within an hour, thousands had dropped to the ground, hands raised, too exhausted even to speak. The rout spread far beyond the valley. Albanian cavalry, knowing every ridge and gully, pursued survivors across the countryside. Small Ottoman groups who believed they had slipped away found themselves trapped in forest pockets or cornered against cliffs. Among them was Hamza, Scanderbeg's own nephew, captured while trying to form a last stand with his dwindling guard. Bloodied and exhausted, he was brought before the uncle he had betrayed. Chroniclers preserve Scanderbeg's cold words: "You chose empire over blood. Now you see the path that led you down." But instead of execution, Hamza received imprisonment, a mercy that surprised even Scanderbeg's closest captains. By midday, the scale of the disaster became undeniable. The Ottoman host that had entered the valley tens of thousands strong now lay shattered. Bodies carpeted the ground so thickly that horses struggled to step between them. The valley entrance itself was blocked by mounds of the dead who had died trying to claw their way out. Estimates would take days, but one truth was immediately clear: the impossible had occurred. Scanderbeg had not merely defeated an Ottoman army, he had annihilated it. The final count staggered even the Albanians. 30,000 Ottomans dead, 15,000 prisoners, nearly double the size of the entire Albanian force. Dozens of captured standards, including Isaac Bey's own banner, lay at Scanderbeg's feet. The wealth seized was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of ducats, pack animals, wagons, and enough weaponry to arm the Albanian League several times over. But the psychological shockwave was even greater. The few survivors who escaped, perhaps 20,000 at most, spread panic through the Balkans. They spoke of smoke demons, of voices echoing from every direction, of Albanians materializing like ghosts in the fog. Veterans who had fought on 3 continents trembled as they recounted the slaughter. Some claimed divine intervention. Others simply whispered, it was the perfect ambush. As the sun climbed higher, the battlefield revealed another tragedy. Thousands of wounded Ottomans still alive, crying out in languages from across the empire. Scanderbeg, understanding the political value of compassion, ordered his men to give water to the wounded. Chroniclers later noted that this gesture, more than the victory itself, reshaped European opinion of the Albanians. When the casualty figures reached foreign courts, Europe erupted. Bells rang in Venice and Rome. Vienna held spontaneous celebrations. For the first time in decades, Christian Europe felt the Ottoman advance could be halted. In poems, paintings, and songs, Scanderbeg became the symbol of resistance, the mountain eagle, the shield of Europe, the dragon who broke the crescent. And military scholars across centuries would study the battle's lessons. How terrain could neutralize numbers. How coordinated ambushes could break even elite troops. How smoke and sound could be transformed into weapons. how a small, determined force could devastate an empire through preparation, timing, and psychology. Albulena did not end the Ottoman Empire, but it marked a turning point. It proved that the empire could bleed, and bleed heavily. It revealed that courage, cunning, and mastery of terrain could overcome overwhelming odds. In the end, the message left in the valley was unmistakable. No empire is invincible. No conquest guaranteed. No victory certain until the final sword falls silent.